This show is sponsored by Charles Schwab. There's strength in numbers. Charles Schwab has 25 million clients and over $7 trillion in client assets, 400 local branches, 36,000 employees, 24/7 live help, and 50 years of experience. There's strength in those numbers, and at Charles Schwab, investors are the number one priority. Visit aboutschwab.com for the numbers and schwab.com to learn more. I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest. It's Wednesday, June 20th, 2023, and on today's show, we'll be discussing the new Wes Anderson film, Asteroid City, the recently released sixth season of Netflix's sci-fi anthology series, Black Mirror, and finally, the state of true crime fandom as of 2023. Joining me today, as the first time for a co-host on our show, is Candice Lim, who is one of the regular co-hosts of Slate podcast ICYMI. Hi, Candice.
Hi, Dana.
And we will also be joined for our first two segments today by Slate senior editor, longtime friend of the podcast, Sam Adams. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Dana. Hi, Candice.
And for our last segment today on true crime, we'll be joined by Slate's own Cheyna Roth. But for now, let's start off with Candice and Sam. Wes Anderson's 11th film opened in theaters across the U.S. last weekend. It stars, among many, many others, Jason Schwartzman, Scarlett Johansson, Tom Hanks, Tilda Swinton, Jeffrey Wright, Edward Norton. If I were to go on listing all the big-name actors who were in this movie, we would use the entire allotted time for this show. So let's just say it's many of Anderson's go-to ensemble cast members, minus Bill Murray, who's been in every other one of his films, I think, and plus a few he's never worked with before. The film is set in 1955 in a desert town somewhere in the American Southwest, where a group of teenage science whizzes and their parents have assembled to observe a rare astrological event. The movie also has an elaborate framing device, which we'll get into in our conversation. Before we get into our discussion, let's hear a clip from Asteroid City. In this scene, you'll hear the voices of Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson as Augie Steenbeck, the war photographer, and Midge Campbell, the movie star.
You took a picture of me.
Uh-huh.
Why?
I'm a photographer.
You didn't ask permission.
I never ask permission.
Why not?
Because I work in trenches, battlefields, and combat zones.
Really?
Uh-huh.
You mean you're a war photographer?
Mostly. Sometimes I cover sporting events. My name is Augie Steenbeck.
Mm-hmm. What are you going to do with that picture?
Well, if it's any good, I guess I'll try to sell it to a magazine, now that you mention it. Midge Campbell, eating a waffle.
Sam, I've written before about how every review of a Wes Anderson movie seems to turn into a referendum on all Wes Anderson movies. Maybe that is unavoidable, and it's impossible to get into our conversation about Asteroid City without asking in general what your attitude is toward this very unique auteur with an extremely strong stylistic signature, let's say. Let me hear a quick Wes Anderson referendum from you, and then what do you think of his latest?
I am a bit of an agnostic in the Wes Anderson wars. I have loved a few of his movies, particularly the sort of Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel mini period. I've been left utterly cold by many of the others, including Asteroid City. But I also think it's a really interesting movie, which is as close to sort of an overt description of what exactly his whole deal is as anything else. So it's a movie that I don't have a huge emotional response to this movie, but I think it's a fascinating, technical manual for what Wes Anderson is trying to do.
And when you say technical manual, what details do you see in this movie that are taking him in a different direction, or maybe just deepening the well that he's already been digging for the last 27 years?
Well, it has an incredibly complicated structure, which you referenced in your introduction, which I think is as close as a person can get to describing this movie without actually sounding like they've completely lost their mind. It has this sort of frame within a frame structure where you were watching a 1950s television adaptation of a play about the making of a different play, which is actually the movie that we are mostly watching. So it's the first Wes Anderson movie that's actually made my head hurt trying to keep things straight. But it is also on some level just an argument about emotion, about kind of grief and trauma, and about kind of reactions to those things, including Wes Anderson's own art, that don't necessarily conform to overly sentimental, like weepy version of processing those things, and the idea that just because you're not kind of being like weepy on main doesn't mean that you're not feeling these things and responding to them in your own way. And I think that really is, that for me at least, that is very useful in like going back and looking at the rest of his movies, including some of the ones that have not struck me that strongly on first watch.
Yeah, Candice, it's a strange paradox of Wes Anderson that he has movie after movie about really intense emotional states, about people processing grief especially. I mean, that's something that since Rushmore has been an obsession of his. But he also has this devotion to, extremely polished surfaces, very mannered dialogue delivery, where, you can almost imagine him sitting down for a coaching session with new actors where he says, don't put too much emotion into it, right? Because there's that dry, deadpan style of delivery that he seems to want all of his actors to engage in. And I wonder how that strikes you as a way of delivering a message in a container that doesn't seem to suit it. That makes some people, I think, really turned off by Wes Anderson because they see him as a filmmaker who's very distanced from raw emotion. And this is a movie, I think, that kind of problematizes that because a lot of the characters suffer from the same problem. But are you genuinely moved by this movie or ever by a Wes Anderson movie?
I am so glad Sam Adams, the professional film critic, said he was left cold, because I am with you, Sam. But I do also have to acknowledge that I am walking into a lion's den as a not Wes Anderson person. Like, I frankly do not care what that little white boy does. But also, I'm like, when it comes to movies, I'm a bit of a jock. Like, I'm more interested in the Fast and Furious type of theatrical releases than like the very artsy, I'm going to say a little bit snobby type of stuff. But I will say that this movie, I definitely walked in expecting a character to deal with grief, a character to have daddy issues, and a character to fall in love. And guess what? All three of those happen. So that's how much I know about Wes Anderson. But I also think that this, to me, strikes more of a deep cut. Like, if you are someone who is a Wes Anderson fan or a completist, this is one of those films that you bring out at a party and everyone's like, whoa, what's that? And you feel like really smart. But for me, I will say that it was hard for me to cut into this movie, meaning it was hard for me to find someone to relate to or at least emotionally cling on to and get into it. There is a point where I was like, I think the only person I identify with is the alien. There is this scene in the movie where an alien, who I think might be like stop motion or claymation, although in the credits it says he was played by Jeff Goldblum, whatever that means. There's an alien that descends to the earth and interacts and meets the characters, and I was very charmed by that. But that's also kind of how I felt walking into this, where I was like, there were people in the audience laughing at stuff that I genuinely was like, where was the joke? I don't get it. But with that being said, I do want to say that the performances I was impressed by. I think Scarlett Johansson was great. I think the first thing, she has a face that fits that era, which is wonderful. But the other half of it is, I think she gets it. I think she really gets it. And I loved the Hong Chow, Adam Brody scenes, even though it was really short and like small. I just thought they really knocked it out of the park. I am never angry about seeing Tom Hanks, aka Chet Hanks's dad, book a role. Congrats to him. And at the end of the day, I can't say I was like moved to pursue more Wes Anderson, and I wasn't like inspired to frame my life in this like pastel-y cute way, but I don't think it was bad. And I definitely think maybe in the entire collection and repertoire of Wes Anderson, to me, this was a little skippable. But I also think if you appreciate what he brings, the pastels and the framing and all that stuff, then like you'll love it, and that's great for you.
I think you touched on something, Candice, there when saying this is sort of like for the real Wes Heads movie. Like, it reminded me of The Life Aquatic, which is a movie whose the main character in that movie is a filmmaker. Like, he's Bill Murray basically playing Jacques Cousteau. And a lot of that movie is about, he makes these documentaries about his undersea adventures that are fake, and whether or not that matters or whether or not they get at the kind of truth. That is also a very like meta movie in which Wes is like dealing with what his whole deal is. For me, the kind of the fulcrum of this movie is the central character basically is Jason Schwartzman, plays this character named Augie Steenbeck, who is a war photographer whose wife has recently died, but is so sort of perhaps because of his job, perhaps just because of who he is not somebody who makes like any overt shows of grief. So it's been like 3 weeks since his wife died, but he hasn't gotten around to telling his children yet, and is bearing this, what we have to assume is this grief with him, but, is fixed in this very sort of deadpan Wes Anderson-y way of going through the world. And I think for me, if there's a reason I don't connect with a movie on a deeper emotional level, is I feel like that works better for Wes Anderson when you have a movie like Bill Murray or Ralph Fiennes in the Grand Budapest Hotel, or Gene Hackman in Royal Tenenbaums, when you have an actor like that at the center of the movie who can keep things really buttoned down and also convey this deep sense of sorrow. That for me is more effective than I don't think Jason Schwartzman is quite getting there. I think for, the people who are feeling for him the same things they felt for him in Rushmore and connecting with him as a sort of Wes Anderson avatar throughout his whole body of work, I think the movie is, from what I'm seeing, like playing more powerfully with them. For me, that performance feels a little bit just kind of more stoic than kind of, I don't know, tragically repressed or whatever.
I think the question with each successive Wes Anderson movie, and I've asked it a few times in writing about him over the years, is he growing as an artist, right? I mean, is he exploring new things and changing with each movie? Or is that stylistic signature I was talking about up top, the classic Wes Anderson framings and the, extreme attention to detail and color, is that getting in the way of him growing as an artist? And I've thought different things about that at different points throughout his career, but I think I'm more enthusiastic about this movie, Asteroid City, than either of you. Even as somebody who can blow hot and cold on this particular auteur, I think if only because of that really, really elaborate framing device that we're talking about, which it's sort of hard to convey until you see the movie exactly how elaborate it is, how many layers there are of, somebody playing an actor who's playing a character. And so and it goes from black and white to color. The aspect ratio goes from sort of old-fashioned Hollywood boxy to a wider screen. And all of that could easily seem like fussy detail work if there wasn't something deeper driving it. And I think there really is in this case. I think that why he wanted to work with those overlapping frames and nested narratives and all of that is that this movie is really asking, and I won't give away what the answer to it is, but it's asking a pretty big and bleak and sometimes nihilistic question about what art is for, right? I mean, there's these people gathered to look up into the sky at an astronomical event, and they're nested inside this bigger story about artists trying to create something. And ultimately, I feel like this is a middle-aged man's movie. Wes Anderson's in his 50s now, about what the purpose of all of the fussy art making that he's been doing for the last 27 years is about. And that in itself, the fact that, that this movie is trying to do something different, even if it doesn't always succeed, made me really respect it. I think I've come around on Wes, where it's sort of like, he may not always be my guy, but I also don't think you can say what I think Stephen Metcalf might say if he was on this show. At least it's what he's always said about Anderson in the past, which is, oh, I wash my hands of him. He just does the same thing over and over. I really don't think that that's true. And this movie seems like proof of it. But did either of you feel that, or do you just not care whether he's growing as an artist or not?
No, I agree with that. I mean, I wrote 2,000 words about it or something. Like, I find this movie really interesting and fascinating without sort of, I'm not like personally moved by it in a way, but I'm really like interested in it. One of the things, and again, it's like, it is too complicated to even for me to explain over the course of several thousand words. But like, one of the things that's going on in the frame story is he's framing this play within a play production as a product of like the method movement in New York theater in the 1940s and 50s, which is obviously the whole, like, basically the polar opposite of Wes Anderson's whole aesthetic. And he has, part of it is a question of whether that is like the most valid or truthful way of representing sort of human emotion. But it is just also a movie. There's an article on Slate that goes viral every summer called "Drowning Doesn't Always Look Like Drowning." And for me, this is a movie about how grieving doesn't always look like grieving. It's an argument that just because people aren't mourning their loss of whatever sort in the way that you expect them to doesn't mean that they're not feeling things very deeply because they're not performing their grief in the right way. And, I think that's a really like fascinating question with a lot of like real world implications. I mean, people like literally go to jail because they're not sort of responding to the death of a loved one in the quote unquote correct way. So I think that resonates in a lot of like interesting directions. And I do, it's a movie that I've seen twice now, including at the Cannes premiere, and I've been thinking about for months. And I've gotten a lot out of that. So I think it's really, this feels like sort of faint praise in a way, but I think it is really interesting in that way.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine this winning over a new convert to this particular director's style, but I don't know. I think I give him some credit for his staying power and his willingness to explore different worlds, even if he explores them in a similar style with each movie.
Mm-hmm. I will say that in terms of how can Wes Anderson grow, at least for me, someone who has yet to be a convert to his style, I'll say this. I give him credit for casting at least 3 actors of Asian descent. Congrats to you, Wes. Could do better. It's fine. But I will say, during this film, I was like thinking like, okay, what would make me watch the next Wes thing? And I was like, TBH, I would love to see Bowen Yang of SNL fame in a Wes Anderson movie. If you cast him, this is a pitch now. If you cast him, I definitely would pay that ticket, go to the AMC MacGuffins, and go to that next movie.
Oh yeah, that's somebody who could master that comic style. And without naming names, there are actors he has worked with in the past, I don't think really in this movie, but for sure in the past, that don't master that style and they really stick out like a sore thumb. But Bowen Yang could completely do it. And in fact, he could be the center of a Wes Anderson movie and carry it off. All right. Well, if nothing else, it's a movie that's fun to debate. It also, as you can tell from just watching the trailers online, is absolutely beautiful looking. And I don't know, I personally say, if you're interested, give it a try. Asteroid City is playing in theaters only right now. If you do see it and you have anything to say, please write us a note at culturefest@slate.com. This show is sponsored by Charles Schwab. There's strength in numbers. Charles Schwab has 25 million clients and over $7 trillion in client assets, 400 local branches, 36,000 employees, 24/7 live help, and 50 years of experience. There's strength in those numbers, and at Charles Schwab, investors are the #1 priority. Visit aboutschwab.com for the numbers and schwab.com to learn more. Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the credit card created by Apple. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that you can now choose to grow in a high-yield savings account at 4.15% annual percentage yield. That's more than 10 times higher than the national average savings rate. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings accounts provided by Goldman Sachs Bank, USA, member FDIC. National average savings rate is from FDIC website. Terms apply. Before we get into the show, let's do the business for this week. First of all, we want to remind our listeners that our annual Summer Strut episode is on the way later this summer. For those of you who are not familiar with this, every summer we ask our listeners to send links to their favorite catchy, upbeat songs, the kind of songs that are perfect for going walking in the summertime. If you have ideas for the list, you can email us the title of the song and the artist, and preferably also a Spotify link at culturefest@slate.com. We're going to compile all of these into a giant playlist. Then each of us will pick our favorite songs, and we'll bring on Slate's Chris Melanphy to discuss them in a later episode, probably in July or August. So send your catchy summery songs to culturefest@slate.com, and if you would, please put Summer Strut somewhere in the subject line so we know to open them up and put them on the playlist. Our second item of business this week is to tell you about today's Slate Plus segment. We decided to talk about a TikTok phenomenon. This is the phenomenon of the beige flag hashtag. People are posting beige flags, that is not a red flag, something that would keep a relationship from going forward, nor a green flag, something that would make you want a relationship to continue, but something in between. When you notice something odd about a new potential partner, but probably something neutral enough that you can go on anyway. We'll talk about whether the concept of beige flags is useful or meaningful, what our own beige flags might be, and more in the Slate Plus segment today. You'll hear that segment at the end of our show if you're a Slate Plus member, and if you're not, you can always sign up at slate.com/cultureplus. In exchange, you'll get ad-free podcasts, you'll get bonus segments like the one I just described, and you'll get unlimited access to all of the great writing on Slate. These memberships are really important for our magazine and our show, so please, if you haven't already, sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. All right, back to the show. We've talked about the Netflix series Black Mirror once before on the Slate Culture Gabfest, all the way back in 2014, when it was, I believe, in its 3rd season. But since this Twilight Zone-style anthology show is an exploration of the dystopic possibilities of 21st century technology, and since that technology has gone through quite a few radical changes since 2014, we thought we would revisit Black Mirror in its 6th season, which has sparked a renewed interest in the show and quite a bit of online discussion. Let's kick our discussion off by listening to a clip from the show. This is from the first episode of this new 6th season, entitled Joan is Awful. You'll hear the voice of Annie Murphy of Schitt's Creek fame, who plays the main character Joan. And here she is discussing, well, we'll get into it a little bit more afterward, but she's discussing with her lawyer what her options are for suing a Netflix-style company that has created a series based on her life.
Right, so it's all computers.
That's how they get it on the service so fast.
But how do they even know what I'm doing? It's the same day.
Well, you know when you got your phone face down on the table and you're in your kitchen and you're talking to your friend about, I don't know, shoe deodorizers. And then, you go on your computer and what pops up? A shoe deodorizing ad. And then you get an email and it's all about shoe deodorizing. And then you're walking down the street and shoe deodorizing and you can't escape it and it's...
Yeah, so?
That's how they know.
Okay, but the show makes stuff up about me, right? It embellishes things. It makes me look worse than I really am. So, defamation.
Candice, I want to know what you think of Black Mirror as a concept and of this particular season, but I want to know, first of all, what you thought of this first episode, which I think is the most striking one and which sets up some themes that are important throughout this entire season of Black Mirror. Can you explain a bit to listeners what is going on in this first episode in which a woman turns on a very Netflix-style streaming show to see her own life being narrated in almost real time?
100%. So this is the first episode of this new season. It's called Joan is Awful, and the Joan is played by Annie Murphy. You'll later realize that there are, let's say, levels or more layers to this Joan character. But it's basically just about, I would say, AI maybe, and the way that technology has kind of allowed us to give up ourselves and our likenesses to create content. I mean, I think the real crux of it is that in the scene where Annie Murphy is talking to her lawyer says that little terms and condition box you always ignore. Well, you click that, and in those terms and conditions, you gave Streamberry, which is the horrible name that they choose for this Netflix-like parallel, you gave them the right to take your life and listen to you via your phone and basically create a show about you. And in this show version, Joan is Awful, Annie Murphy's character is played by Salma Hayek, which I was like, all right, whatever. But as we get more and more deeper into this, I would say that it was a really strong first episode for me. My own relationship to Black Mirror is that I have not watched it since Bandersnatch, which was the thing where you like played it and you would play like, ooh, which way do you want to go? And I believe Will Poulter was in that. And so the thing about Black Mirror to me is that I have always felt quite distant from the characters it's talking about. I remember the very first episode on Netflix of Black Mirror is about a prime minister who has to do things to a pig in order to free a member of the royal family. And I kind of had this concept of, okay, the technology is bad and it's supposed to creep me out and it's supposed to like make me feel hesitant and paranoid, but I don't plan on being the prime minister anytime soon. I don't plan on being a pop star like Ashley O, which is the character Miley Cyrus played in the last season. So I think the strength of this season, because I do agree, I don't think there's any duds here, is that these characters felt a lot more lived in and they felt a lot more closer to earth, meaning, let's take Joan is Awful, for example. She plays this like tech person and I definitely got like Megan vibes from it, but I also could see my friend unfortunately being in that circumstance, and so that was a lot more relatable for me. You know, as the episodes go on, I will just say straight up that my favorite episode was Beyond the Sea, which stars Aaron Paul, and I think he absolutely nailed it. And that's another thing where like he plays a let's call it an astronaut. He plays like an astronaut space station guy who has a living life form on Earth that he can kind of like chip into, and that's not the life I live. But I could understand emotionally just where he was coming from and the things that led him to do what he did. And I really like that about the season. And I will say the one that I didn't love as much was Loch Henry. It's the second episode. My problem with that is that was not really about technology. That was a little bit more about true crime and just like finding out information about your history and whatever. But also I had like 5 predictions of how that episode would end, and my prediction was correct. So outside of that, I do think everything for this season like lifted for me, and I was like, okay, I think I'm kind of into this, and I actually did really like what they did with this season.
Wow, you and I are opposites when it comes to Black Mirror. Your favorite episode was my least favorite, and vice versa.
I like that.
But I don't think I would agree in general that there were no duds. In fact, what I thought of this season is quite similar to what I believe my previous experience of Black Mirror was, which is that, as would happen logically with an anthology style series, there's a wild gap between the ups and the downs, and not a lot of tonal consistency to the show. They really are each little mini movies, and I think you could watch them without any relation to the others, or even knowing that they're part of a rubric called Black Mirror, the technology series, and either like them or not like them on their own merits. What about you, Sam? What stood out for you in this 6th season?
For me, my overall reaction to the series, I was sort of a fan of Black Mirror going back to when it was like this weird British series that like your cool friends would like torrent or have like on import DVD. And it felt like really potent as this cult object. And the sort of watching it become like an object of the discourse as it's been on Netflix has been sort of a mixed blessing. But this season to me feels like the series is like really just out of gas. I think like Charlie Brooker, who is writing, there's some seasons on Netflix where he hasn't written all the episodes and has sort of just shared the wealth. He wrote all 5 episodes of this season, I guess 4 of them himself, and I think 1 is a co-write. It really just feels like he has run out of things to say about technology in particular. And 2 or maybe 3 of these episodes really have nothing to do with that central theme. And some of those are the best for me, like particularly the last one, which is called Demon 79, which is just like straight up supernatural and has nothing to do with tech whatsoever. That is the one I enjoyed the most, but it also just doesn't belong in this series at all. And it's actually confusing and almost like false advertising to put it under that rubric. It's interesting for me that Joan is Awful and to a lesser extent Loch Henry, which Candice mentioned, make Netflix like the big villain. The Streamberry series that you mentioned, Dana, is like, you know, it has the same like UI interface on the TV. It has the little dong when you log on to it. I mean, it's very clearly Netflix is not trying to be subtle about that at all, but he just doesn't have anything particularly pointed or interesting to say about that. There's no, like, the best of these sort of dystopian like tech fables are really like, ooh, this thing that we always thought we wanted could actually go in this really bad direction. And like they have that cautionary tale aspect to them. And I just don't, the episodes in the season just don't really connect to anything on a larger level for me. So even the ones that kind of work as stories just don't have that, you know, for me, what the kick of the best Black Mirror episodes are.
Yeah, insofar as this show is trying to be a Twilight Zone, I kind of wish that it did what the Twilight Zone did in terms of form. I mean, the Twilight Zone obviously had wildly different, you know, stories and themes and characters for each episode, but it had a very consistent tone and form. And that made it almost a comfort show in spite of the often disturbing themes that it explored. And I got really bothered by even the inconsistent duration of these episodes. I mean, it's TV. Be a TV show. Have a format. There is literally a 42-minute episode and an 80-minute episode in the same season. And that just seems to me like it's great that Charlie Brooker has ideas and is sitting and sketching them out and turning them into pieces of televisual work, but that doesn't make it a show. I don't know. Perhaps this is just my movie person and not a TV person bias coming out. But when a show gets so formless as to have some episodes that are twice as long as the previous episode, it no longer seems like a TV show to me.
And the thing is, I'm kind of the opposite, where I'm more of a TV person than a film person. But I can meet you there, Dana, about the length of it, where I was like, oh, Beyond the Sea is basically a movie. Okay, great. But great in a bit of a like sarcastic way. I will say I will give credit to this season in that I am someone who, when I watch TV, I tend to make it a 2-screen experience, meaning there's something happening on Roku and then I'm on my phone reaching for it because I'm just bored. And I was shocked by how engaged I was with these episodes, that I stayed on it and I was like actually paying attention. But I will also meet you, Sam, and say that I think Black Mirror should end here. I think Charlie Brooker and Annabelle Jones should do something else because, like you said, Dana, we're entering this like Twilight Zone-y commentary. We're moving away from technology being the evil and just people being the evil, which is still valid. But I think the Black Mirror, let's say, container has created an expectation for audiences, but also limited what the things are about. Because I agree that last episode to me felt literally like a different show. It was still good, but it was a different show. And I will say one thing I'll also give credit for is that I think Black Mirror historically has been like a really good showcase of up and coming talent. I think from the UK side, I was so excited to see Anjana Vasan and Layla Farzad and Lily Adefope in this. And then on the US side, we have like very, very strong presences like Ayo Adebri and Jabuki Young White. Even from the second episode that I did not like, I will say Myha'la Herrold did really well. And I feel like Black Mirror used to be like the White Lotus call, where people and actors were so excited to come on because it's, oh my God, this show has won Emmys. This could be exciting. But now with White Lotus, you can go to the 4 seasons for free. So now it's like we need some stipulations. However, with that being said, I also think that Black Mirror, I used to think of it as very like scary or kind of horror, like, oh, if you don't like looking at that stuff, maybe don't watch it. I would say with this one, if you don't like violence, I feel like there's probably at least a murder every episode. It just felt like someone was always bashing someone's head with a hammer. Maybe step back from this season. But yeah, I think it's time to move on from Black Mirror, frankly.
Yeah, completely agree, Candice, that it's as a vehicle for performances that this season really shone. And in particular, I really, really loved Papa Isiedu, who you might recognize from I May Destroy You, as the demon, this very fun-loving and personable demon in the last episode. But as for a future for this show, I was wondering if you guys noticed that last episode, which, as we've said, was more of a sort of 70s style horror movie in miniature form than anything to do with technology or dystopia at all. It's titled Red Mirror at the beginning. That's the legend that appears before it starts, which was apparently a different kind of show, probably a horror type show that Brooker was envisioning at one point and decided not to do and just preserved this one episode from. But I would be happy to see him move in that direction. Maybe he's done with this particular form of thinking about technology and wants to just do some more genre experiments in that mode, which I, for one, would welcome.
Yeah, that one is also sort of structured as a parable. It's just not about technology. It's about, the rise of Thatcherism and the National Front in British politics and the acceptable face of political racism. And it works really well on that level. It has like really, the vibes remind me a lot of like a Peter Strickland movie, like In Fabric. It has that really sort of overworked, like shot on film and then run over by a car look to it, which I love. Yeah, and I think if there's a way to, for Brooker or whoever to sort of keep doing this sort of genre parable thing and just disconnect from the tech idea, I think that might be, it does seem like that's more of a way forward.
All right. Well, the show is Black Mirror. It's streaming in its entirety. The whole season is only 5 episodes on Netflix right now. If you do see it and you have some thoughts, write us at culturefest@slate.com. All right. Well, Sam, thank you very much. This is the second week in a row that you've come in for a last-minute rescue mission on the Culture Gabfest when one of our regular hosts had to bow out. And you did it on vacation this week. So extra thanks for coming on.
Not at all. Thanks, Dana.
Hey, listeners, there's a new podcast from Lemonada Media called Wiser Than Me, hosted by the great Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Each week, she'll be interviewing iconic guests like Jane Fonda, Diane von Furstenberg, Darlene Love, and more. You'll hear her get schooled on life by women older than her and hear about everything they've learned living to 70, 80, or even 85 years old. These conversations are intimate, witty, and wise, with lots of personal stories you've never heard before from both Julia and her guests. Every episode also includes Julia debriefing with her mom, Judy, which sounds like a good feature to me because I would love to hear it from the mom of someone as funny as Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I imagine her mom must be funny too. Listen to Wiser Than Me, out now wherever you get your podcasts. At the end of your first year, Discover credit cards automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right. Everything you've earned, doubled. All the cash back from eating at your favorite soup dumpling restaurant, doubled. All the cash back from that trip where you sort of learned to snowboard, also doubled. And the best part, you don't have to do anything ridiculous to get it. Nope, Discover does it automatically. Seriously, though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match. It's now nearly 9 years since the podcast Serial launched its first season, reopening the investigation into the murder of a high school student in Baltimore back in 1999. Serial's mega success has given rise to a multimedia industry of true crime podcasts, documentaries, fictionalized TV series about podcasts, think Only Murders in the Building, and online amateur sleuthing communities. The genre that we call true crime is an amalgam of journalism, detective fiction, and plain old-fashioned rubbernecking, and it has become ubiquitous in a way that some observers find ethically troublesome. A recent article in The Atlantic about the swarming of packs of true crime aficionados to an actual murder scene at the University of Idaho got us thinking about the implications of true crime's invasion of popular culture and of everyday life. So we decided to bring on a guest who is a self-proclaimed aficionado of the true crime genre, Cheyna Roth. Cheyna is a podcast producer at Slate and an occasional guest host of the podcast The Waves. Cheyna, it's your first time on our show, so welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So I don't even know where to start with true crime because it has infiltrated our culture so completely. I mean, it so happens that we are pegging this to the story of a real life murder that drew a lot of true crime aficionados. But you could approach it from so many different angles than that. It's essentially impossible to turn on Netflix without seeing something related to the true crime genre. In fact, it's even parodied in the season of Black Mirror that we discussed on this very show. Let's start with this. What was your into this world and what is your relationship to it now?
Oh, God. So I've always been fascinated with crime. I've just thought of it as being the ultimate human drama. What causes someone to commit a crime? And I say crime very generally. I know when we talk about true crime, we're often talking about murders. My thing is I've always been very interested in heists, kidnappings, different types of crime. But I ended up becoming a prosecuting attorney after I graduated from law school. And that to me felt like the sort of antithesis of this interest in crime was to sort of tackle it from one side of the criminal justice system. It was definitely not a proper career path for me. I bowed out of it fairly quickly and realized that I was more interested in the stories. Eventually, I ended up publishing a true crime book. I was approached by a publisher to write a collection of cold cases. And that experience writing that book is what really, I think, got me into the sort of true crime community, or at least made me see how concerning this community can be and how difficult it is to be a part of it in a healthy way. And if you read the book called Cold Cases, you kind of get a sense with each chapter of me wrangling with, should I even be participating in this? Should I even be writing about JonBenet Ramsey or some of these other cold cases like the Black Dahlia, things that have been written about time and time again? And should we just stop doing this? And why are we so interested in crime, particularly murder?
Yeah, I mean, I can't help thinking when you mentioned, for example, JonBenet Ramsey, who obviously the interest in that case preceded what I'm calling the wave of true crime interest and preceded the internet too, really, or was at the very beginnings of the internet, right? It was more of a TV phenomenon. But it seems like the internet and the expansion of the internet into every corner of our lives is what has really turned this into a pathology, right? What you used to have to turn on cable news to kind of wallow in unhealthily, you can now get into some sort of Reddit group. I mean, apparently there are Reddit groups having to do with the murder from the first season of Serial that have been going on for 9 years. People are still getting on there, logging on to post their conspiracy theories, etc. Candice, is this something that draws you as a viewer and appreciator of pop culture, or is it something that repels you?
It does repel me. However, I will say that I kind of understand where people who basically engage in true crime and hunt down these answers comes from. For me, my entry into this is I used to love this show on MTV called Catfish, and I think it's still going. But Catfish is basically where Neve Schulman, a filmmaker, helps people who are in online-only relationships meet up with the person they've been speaking to online. And unfortunately, the end of it is usually like, oh, you were not who you said you were. The photos were fake, all this stuff. In the middle of that investigation, they do things like, let's reverse search the phone number, let's reverse search the photos, let's find their address, let's link it to their employer, all this stuff. I think that, plus there is this 2018 movie called Missing. It stars John Cho, and it's about him basically only using technology, so you only see like the screenshot of a MacBook. It's about him finding his daughter who he is searching for. But I think these two together have created this era of the DIY-ness. This idea that, well, I have the same internet access, I can use those tools and I can find mystery too, and I can solve these things. And I think there's a lot of issues with that. The first one being that I think all three of us are journalists or would like to call ourselves journalists. And the thing about being a journalist is that when you get into these things and you make a reporting mistake, you're fired. Your credibility is shot. You go into marketing. However, with these online creators who, let's say, go to a house where 4 students were murdered and they treat it like a tourist attraction and they investigate, in quotes, they knock on doors of neighbors, all this stuff. The issue with these Reddit communities, these TikTok comments, is a lot of speculation is being confused with analysis or expertise. There's a reason ghost hunters are a real profession. And I think when you are not a journalist, when you're not a police officer either, there are no standards to uphold. There are no consequences for basically rifling through and spreading misinformation. And that is the issue, I think, here with me, which is that misinformation and unvetted information, it becomes so easy to just spin out and spiral that it's hard to stop the water from flowing. And so I have a very visceral reaction to stories like we're talking about in The Atlantic. I have a very I just don't like the way it feels, because the other half of it is that this Atlantic article is about a murder that happened in November 2022 to 4 University of Idaho students who were murdered in a house. And I am willing to bet that murder itself really impacted this community, this neighborhood, the people who live next door on the left and right of this house. And so for people, strangers, to come to your town and basically ask you and prod about the worst thing that's ever happened on your street is so triggering, but it's because they see it as content. And that is where I start to feel like, we need to rein some reins here.
Yeah, that piece is very dark. I mean, it would be pretty hard to come out of reading that reported piece about what that Idaho town of Moscow was like after those murders, essentially being besieged. It is like a Black Mirror episode, right? I mean, amateur sleuths knocking on your door and leaving notes on your car windshield, and, people just having to hide out in their houses from these would-be investigators is just very dark. It's obviously not the case that every true crime piece of media has taken things in that direction. And I suppose you could argue that some good has been done. I mean, if you believe that Adnan Syed, the accused murderer in the serial case, was innocent, then, the fact that he, in part, I think because of the attention brought to the case by the podcast, is currently out of prison, correct? I think right now he is at least temporarily out of prison after 23 years. Then maybe the true crime wave is doing some good as well. I mean, there's 2 questions, though. Is it doing good out in the world? And then what is it doing to the psyches and brains of the people, who are really enmeshed in that world? And it seems as well that there's a lot of evidence that it's not a really healthy thing to be doing with your time, to be, choosing a case to obsess over for years on end.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's not just the amateurs, right? The article talked about how there are also a lot of news outlets, some credible news outlets who were also there, who were knocking on doors, who were really trying to get the scoop on all of this. And not just Nancy Grace, but who I have so many problems with, but legitimate news outlets. And it seems as though, for whatever reason, maybe it's because everybody loves a mystery and everybody wants to be able to solve a mystery. True crime is what a lot of news sources and real journalists are looking to in order to stay afloat. A lot of news industries are on life support right now, but true crime and grisly murders are still getting them the clicks, they're getting them the views, they're getting them the ratings. So you have this unhealthy atmosphere being created by both the amateur journalists and the professional journalists, which I think makes it even more difficult to tell what is the accurate sort of translation of what's happening, like what is the real journalism going on here, and what is the really just conspiracy theory grossness.
And that has a larger implication than just whatever particular crime is at issue in one of these cases, right? I mean, in the same way that, QAnon conspiracy theories or anti-vax theories, I mean, the idea that in general that there is this free-floating speculation, right, in which truth is sort of immaterial, that just seems like it's dangerous for journalism and for the mental health of society in general.
Okay, I mean, that was a really interesting point that the author made in this article, was likening these Reddit groups and these Facebook groups that are obsessed with different true crimes to your QAnons and your other really alt-right Trumpian sort of online support groups in a way. It's this weird thing where you get involved in an echo chamber and you just keep trying to figure out, thinking that like maybe today will be the day that I solve this thing, that I figure out this conspiracy, that I will be a hero. And I think that's what really makes all of this very tragic, but also very enticing to people, is this opportunity to be a hero, is this idea that, well, I've seen movies and I've seen documentaries where people just like me are able to affect change. Maybe I will be the one to do this. And then they just get really involved into it, and it's hard for them to pull away.
I also have an interesting, left turn on this, which is that when I think about this case in particular with the Atlantic, these 4 students at the University of Idaho, very young, when they were grislyly murdered in this house, sometimes I wonder if these, let's say, people who are really into true crime, spending time in the comments, trying to answer questions that, frankly, I'm not exactly sure if they're entitled to answer. There is definitely this idea of the hero's journey, this idea that, if I solve it, I'm the main character. Look at me, gonna be an EP on a Netflix show. And it's like, yeah, I understand. Everyone wants that Dahmer Emmy. I get it. I think the other half for me is I wonder if there is this mourning of the life that these victims lost. This idea that they were so young, they had so much going for them, and they were not able to fulfill that leg of it, that talkers are coming in and trying to speculate on it and trying to basically prolong a legacy of some sort. I just think what it sometimes can be is that people are stimulated by fear. They're stoked by fear. They're stoked by change and questions unanswered. And I wonder if there is this moment of man, these young people had this crime happen to them. Could it have been prevented? If so, I want to find all the answers and all the steps back and front to make sure it doesn't happen to me, to make sure that my legacy does not get lost the way theirs are. Because I think at some point when you're deep in the true crime ecosystem, you do have that self-reflection, let's say that Black Mirror of should I be doing this? Should I really be getting involved and obsessing over someone that I did not know alive? So why do I care about knowing them dead? That's kind of where I end up on this, where I'm like, man, I think everyone is entitled to a hobby. I think everyone is entitled to be interested in what they're interested in. But sometimes I think people get a little bit too comfortable with someone else's life that maybe they would not have cared about unless they were murdered in this grisly house in the University of Idaho's campus.
Yeah. And I mean, it's definitely one thing for this to be a hobby and to just enjoy reading true crime books or to enjoy watching true crime documentaries. But a lot of these people are taking it outside of their homes and they're interfering with police investigations. They're terrorizing people who have nothing to do with it. They're ruining reputations. And I think when you have, say, somebody get their story who is not actually a victim, but who is one of these people who sort of became an amateur detective, when they are offered a book deal or they are offered a Netflix series based on them, it happens once and then everybody thinks that's going to be me next. So you have this response by the larger society encouraging this. We're not necessarily telling people this is a bad thing, except for when you get great articles like this. Instead, we're rewarding it. We're saying you could be the next person in Don't Fuck with Cats who gets a whole documentary made about how great you are for digging into a case that everybody else was ignoring.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not even only nonfiction that's to blame for this. We've talked before on this show about just murder as a TV theme. Yes. Why is it that nearly every new show that's a drama, that's not a sitcom, needs to start off with some dead body? Usually a female, usually a young, attractive, white female body, lying dead somewhere. I mean, this is getting to be a little bit less of a trope than it used to be, but it still drives so much of what we see when we turn on the television. And it seems like it's all, to me, part of the same sort of murder detective industrial complex that breeds the idea in people that they are going to be the one to solve the next murder that comes along. All right. Well, the article that sparked this discussion is called The Gross Spectacle of Murder Fandom. It's by McKay Coppins in The Atlantic. Take a look at it. And if you have thoughts, write us at culturefest@slate.com.
Sex and the City is iconic. The fashions.
But this is an outfit.
The romances.
Ladies, I'm taking a lover. Yes, a lover.
The fights.
I'm out of here. All we talk about anymore is big or balls or small dicks.
And of course, the questions.
I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder. I couldn't help but wonder.
After 6 seasons and 2 movies, Carrie, Miranda, Charlotte, and Samantha hung up their Jimmy Choos for a decade. But last year, they came back. Well, most of them came back. Love it or hate it, season 1 of HBO's And Just Like That caused quite a stir. Whether it was the death of a very big character.
My husband died. Death. The ultimate breakup.
Carrie's new role as a podcaster.
Still haven't listened to it, have you?
Carrie, I love you to death, but I draw the line at podcasts.
The omission of Samantha.
You know, it is kind of like she's dead, Samantha. We never even talk about her.
Or the Che Diaz of it all.
You're not happy with who you are? Step out of that box and change it! Change!
We couldn't stop thinking about And Just Like That. Now, Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte are coming back for a 2nd season, and The Waves is going to be covering it all. Every week, Slate Plus members will get a very special And Just Like That recap episode, hosted by myself, Cheyna Roth, and a very exciting lineup of your favorite Slatesters, like Daisy Rosario, Luke Wilkie, and Heather Schwedel. Look for the And Just Like That recap in The Waves feed. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can join now by going to slate.com/thewavesplus to get all these special episodes, along with tons of other bonus goodies. Slate.com/thewavesplus.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. Welcome to the window of opportunity, when your next move can either make your business famous or obsolete. So you need to be ready. Be handling good surprises and bad ones ready. Be opening a Portland, Houston, and Providence location on the same day ready. Be stock options plus paid family leave ready. SAP has been there and can help you be ready for anything that happens next, because it will. Be ready with SAP. All right, well, we've done it. We've made it to the part of the Slate Culture Gabfest where we give our endorsement for the week. Candice, I'll start with you. What was there that charmed or enchanted you in culture this week?
So for me, it is a book. It is by Marissa Meltzer. It's called Glossy, Ambition, Beauty, and the Inside Story of Emily Weiss's Glossier. So this book is coming out in September, but I was so hungry to get my hands on this when it was announced because I, unfortunately, am very obsessed with the girl boss era that I do feel like has ended with Emily Weiss, who stepped down from her role as CEO of Glossier, which is the makeup brand. And this book is actually, I would compare it to just like a really good long article about the start and demise of a very successful company. You know, Glossier did hit unicorn status, which means they were valued at over $1 billion at some point. But I think when a female founder steps down from a company, with or without scandal, there are so many questions of like, why'd you leave? What happened? What led to this moment for you to basically ungirl boss yourself? And I think this book was great. It was well written. I was really into it. And I think the investigating that Marissa Meltzer does, the reporting she does, the interviews she does with employees and former employees who do have actual real complaints against their time at Glossier, it makes this really full story that I was into. And I feel like there's definitely these types of business books you see on like annoying guys' shelves of like the Phil Knight book, the Steve Jobs book, these very businessy, financy, like if I can do it, you can do it too. I think this book will be that type of book for a lot of women and for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I was just really into it and it met my expectations. My only note is that I would like to see someone write a book about Tyler Haney and Outdoor Voices, or Leandra Medine Cohen and Man Repeller, or Audrey Gelman and The Fall of the Wing. I think this is a good starter to what I hope is more and more books about this era that was so volatile, but I still am so interested in. So that's Glossy, Ambition, Beauty, and the Inside Story of Emily Weiss's Glossier by Marissa Meltzer. It's coming out in September.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, and it's true that is a real hole in the publishing industry. Girl boss business book. Cheyna, what have you got endorsement-wise?
Okay, this is a show or a sort of franchise on Bravo that has been around for a long time, but I still have trouble finding people who are actually watching it. It's called Below Deck. There are many different spin-offs. There's original Below Deck, there's Below Deck Mediterranean, and right now Below Deck Sailing Yacht is on. And when I tell you that this is one of my favorite parts of every week is getting to watch Below Deck, I am not lying. It is so messy and so fun that it's a show about the crew of a luxury sailing yacht and the different guests that come on the yacht. Each week it's, a different group of people and just all of the drama. It's got a very upstairs, downstairs vibe to it. Some of the people stick with you from season to season. A lot of times it's a whole new cast. I can't explain enough how much joy Below Deck brings me, especially in these weird times. Like, it is the ultimate, turn off your brain. Look at the beautiful horizon. Look at all the pretty pictures and the pretty people and watch them be messy and have a weird time and drink too much and be in a hot tub. It's so much fun. So that's Below Deck. It's on Bravo. I highly recommend people check it out.
Wow, Cheyna, I Googled that while you were talking because I'd never heard of that show, and it's been on for 10 years. Did you realize it's a decade-old show?
It's been on for so long. I've seen every episode multiple times, and still, a lot of people have not heard of it. It is one of the Bravo big flagship shows, and still, there's so many people who have not gotten to enjoy it. It's so good. And you can pick. You can do original Below Deck. You can go to Norway and do a Below Deck adventure. They're all just so fun.
It's like Triangle of Sadness, but more fun.
Yes,
100%.
Exactly.
Triangle of Happiness.
Yeah, look, Cheyna, I am with you. I'm also Below Deck Hive. I'm specifically Below Deck Down Under vibe. So we'll talk.
I forgot about Below Deck Down Under. See, there's just so much there. I'm jealous of you for not having gotten to experience it yet. It's perfect for the summertime. Just enjoy. Get some popcorn. You'll love it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll end up covering it on this show. I always love when a show pops up like that that's had an audience for a decade and I've never heard of it. It just proves that there's always new things to discover in the labyrinth of TV.
Anytime you want to talk about it, I will talk all about it. The Gary drama this season is just all out of control.
All right, my endorsement this week is something that I really wish we had covered on this show. I think it's a little too late now, and I'm hoping that I can still turn some listeners onto it. But have either of you seen the made-for-TV movie Reality about Reality Winner that's streaming on Netflix right now?
Not yet. I want to.
So this is something different than I thought it was because it's on HBO or HBO Max or Max, whatever it's now called. But because it comes from that network and it's about a recent political event, right? It's about the arrest of Reality Winner during the Trump administration for smuggling documents or one document out of a secure facility. I thought that it was going to be one of those HBO type shows like, the one with Julianne Moore as Sarah Palin, one of those reenactments of, a fictionalized reenactment of a recent political event. But it is actually something quite different from that and more experimental and more interesting. What it is, it's based on a theater piece and directed by the woman who directed it as a theater piece. That's an exact transcript of the interview that Reality Winner had with with two FBI agents when she was apprehended. And it's word for word, every and every awkward pause left in, the exact transcript of that hour and a half long conversation turned into a real-time hour and a half long movie. And so, among other things, for one thing, it taught me a lot about that case that I didn't know. But most interestingly of all, it was not fictionalized or dramatized. And it's just such a great challenge for actors to speak words that come out of a typed transcript of a real conversation that's as high stakes as that, but was not written to be dramatic, right? Was not written for narrative purposes. And Sydney Sweeney, who plays Reality Winner, just really, really crushes it. It's an incredible acting challenge to appear to be saying all these ums and uhs and appear to be having this experience in real time. And she completely pulls it off. It's all the more impressive given that it's practically a two-hander. There are two cops interviewing her, but one of them doesn't speak that much. It's basically a conversation between Sydney Sweeney's character and one played by Josh Hamilton, the very lovable dad in 8th grade, playing a very different kind of character. This apparently easygoing, but actually quite tough FBI investigator who's interviewing her. And I just couldn't recommend it more highly. It's the first time this director has made a movie. She's a theater director doing cinema for the first time. And I honestly think if this had been at the movies and had a normal theatrical release, it would be considered one of the best movies of the year so far. But nobody's talking about it because it was dumped unceremoniously onto Netflix. So if you're thinking about streaming the movie Reality, I highly, highly recommend it. And yeah, it's streaming on Netflix right now. All right, well, that does it for this week's show. Candice, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your first time, I hope not your last. And same for you, Cheyna. Thanks so much for coming in to give us some true crime down low.
This was a pleasure. Thank you.
You can find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us, as always, at culturefest@slate.com. Our intro music is by the wonderful composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant is Kat Hung. Our producer today is Jared Downing, with some behind-the-scenes help from Cameron Drews. I'm Dana Stevens. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Hey listeners, there's a new podcast from Lemonada Media called Wiser Than Me, hosted by the amazing Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Every week she'll be interviewing iconic guests like Jane Fonda, Diane von Furstenberg, Darlene Love, and more. You'll hear Julia get schooled on life by women older than her and hear about everything they've learned living to 70, 80, or even 85 years old. Listen to Wiser Than Me, out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something. Music.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.